What you need to be, and I think with AI, what we still need to be is critical thinkers. At the end of the day, architects are communicators. We communicate through drawings to our clients. Those drawings can be simple diagrams, they can be physical models, they can be VR headsets, whatever it might be of a technology spectrum.
Hey guys, my name is Toby. I'm an architectural photographer and filmmaker based in Chicago. And I have started a 10-part series, a 10-part interview series titled The Future of Architecture, covering a vast amount of topics within the architecture industry, such as architecture and technology, leadership in architecture. So I want you to join me along as I go on this first part of this journey, which is titled Steering Architecture in the Right Direction. My goal is simple: to create a platform for respectful dialogue in the architecture, construction, engineering, design, and art industry, and to enable and allow people outside the architecture industry to understand and to value and appreciate architecture and the things that go into architecture. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, subscribe so that we can be able to build up this platform and help monetize it, because it costs a lot to be able to put this together. And we want to be able to give you the best quality. Consider purchasing some of the merch that we have. The link is in the description, so feel free to check out the merch and purchase to be able to help us support the channel. Without further ado, let's go into the first interview.
Hello everybody, my name is Toby. I'm a photographer here in Chicago, an architecture photographer and filmmaker, and I'm here with
Joe Cliggott.
Awesome, nice to meet you, Joe.
Hi, Tom.
Nice to have you in the studio. So today we're going to be talking about the architecture industry, specifically about the topic of steering architecture in the right direction through great leadership. Joe is an architect in Chicago and has been here for many years. It's a great, vast experience, and so he's going to talk to us about a bunch of different questions, tell us about himself and whatnot. So, Joe, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your upbringing and things of that nature.
So, Joe Cliggott, grew up in Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, which is a wonderful place to be from, beach community. I went to Penn State for my architecture studies. And then I moved out here to Chicago 30 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
In March of 1995. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes.
That was the year I was born.
Okay, thanks.
Not telling you you're old, but just
Let's roll.
mentioning it. You're not a wonderful Joe. That's amazing. I actually have family in Massachusetts, in Boston.
Oh,
my older brother lives there. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, it's nice to know. That's awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into architecture and how has it shaped your journey and your leadership style?
Sure. Well, I've, like many of us, wanted to be an architect since I was a small child. Legos and Lincoln Logs. And then I think, I remember seeing Walt Disney would have a show every Sunday night. And one of the times he presented the model of Epcot. And I just thought, wow, somebody can design a whole city. And so, of course, I remember in 5th grade, I redesigned our little town with a monorail, just like Disney, because I thought that's what the future would be, right? So I've always been interested in the built environment as a child, right? So.
No, that's amazing. And can you share a moment in your career where leadership made all the difference in the project that you've worked on? Because from what you just told us about, even the inspiration of the TV show that you watched. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, leadership comes through, but not for myself, but seeing it through others, from clients who are visionary, from the artists that I've worked with. We're trying to, just like that Disney, we're trying to design the future, and it's always with optimism. We want to make the world better, right? Our buildings are going to be better, the communities are going to be better because of the work that we're doing. So that leadership comes through as like a leap of faith that we're hopeful for the future, right? Yeah. And again, that comes through whether it's the clients who are supportive from a leadership perspective, allowing us as artists to pursue the visions, to be supportive. Projects are complicated. It is complicated to get things built. But if you can lead through that to see the vision, right, that's when it comes through, I think.
Right. So, just piggybacking off the question of the statement you just made, and it was, apologies, it was actually not in in the question, but how are you able to balance both like the client needs and even from the architecture and artistic standpoint of design, how are you able to balance those two things?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're not separated because we are ultimately, I think that architecture is an art. There is a science to it, obviously, with building and construction, but it's the only art that you can't turn off, right? I mean, if you don't like the music, you can turn the music off, right? If you don't want to see the painting, you don't have to look at it, right? But architecture is something that you have to, that everyone lives with and exists in. But I think the strongest work, and again, the strongest clients, can sort of see a concept kind of beyond. You know, you can get hung up in the details, but are you able to kind of push through and say, with all the things, the codes, the finances, the needs of the users, the tenants, what do we want to actually build, right? And again, with that sense of optimism. We're also always building, hopefully building for 50, 100 years in the future, which we can't anticipate what that world is going to look like completely. So we're often making our best guess and best judgment on what that wants to be. From an environmental standpoint, from a needs standpoint, the complexities of buildings are like, it's a pretty, such a major undertaking, right? And so, I think again that leadership is more about the vision, right? About having a vision of what the optimistic future wants to be.
Right, and I think that we're also always like improving as a society from the standpoint of even research and how those things kind of merge with architecture, urban design, maybe from even the biological sciences, what we learn about humans, what we learn about even like the ecological system and all those things. And I find it interesting how those things come together like within architecture and sort of makes architecture and architects very versed and diverse in their way of practice, and it's almost like there's never an ending amount of fun in the practice of architecture and in architecture evolving and all of those things. So I guess one of the questions I want to ask is, in your view, what does good leadership look like in architecture today?
Good leadership, and this will probably be a recurring theme, starts with listening. It's listening to the clients. I think architects may tend to think they know all the answers, right? And again, like the Disney example, where I'm going to design a whole city, and it's this little model, and I'm going to control the world, this sort of godlike thing, right? Even the scale that I'm so big compared to this. The reality is we need to stop and listen and hear what our clients are asking for. Perhaps what the community is asking for, what the users of the building are going to be. You have to do some deep research. Empathy. We can't we can't represent everyone who may possibly use the building in its lifetime. Because it's going to hopefully outlive all of us. The buildings that we create, right? And so you're trying to again empathize and anticipate the needs of people that you may never meet, right? So in order to do that, I think you need to stop and listen at first.
And it's also a bit quite difficult to anticipate the needs of people because technology changes, culture changes and shifts, and the needs of society sort of just changes rapidly, especially with technology, like things that you wouldn't have imagined 5 to 10 years ago, right? Or things that are happening right now, right? And so how we interact with our community changes. So I feel like it's a bit of a difficult thing to do, but that's why it's also very important to listen rather than pre-plan
Yes.
the city. And so, I mean, even in terms of working with your clients and also trying to fulfill or cater to their needs, how are you able to also successfully bring community and the needs of community into those projects that you work on?
Right. I mean, it starts at the beginning of our projects that we push for visioning sessions, community outreach, community engagement, making sure that we've done our research, as well as validating. Maybe the client is coming and saying, we've done our research. We also then come and validate, is that true, right? Is that, has something changed? Is the research that you've done out of date? Did it happen, before COVID? Does that still apply, for instance, right, in the environment? Okay, well, that was old data, that was old research. What's happened? What technology has changed, right?
Well, that's very interesting. And what would you say is some of the biggest challenges that architecture faces, and how can leadership help navigate those challenges?
I think it always comes back to value. Like, is our work valued? Is architecture valued? Again, this is an art that you can't escape. So understanding that some clients may only be interested in, I'm going to build this and I'm going to sell it. I'm not going to hold on to it. It's different than an institutional client who may say, I anticipate building this for 100 years because I'm still going to be here as an institution in 100 years. So we are invested in this in a different way than perhaps a client, maybe a more commercial client who's interested in it as an investment. And so then I think we have to listen and empathize, understand their desires and needs, meet them, because that's what we're being paid to do, right? But bring value to them so that they appreciate and understand what it is that we're able to deliver to them.
Right, that's interesting. Many people say architecture is at its crossroad, right? Do you think it's heading in the right direction, or do you think we need a major shift in the industry of architecture?
So I graduated 30 years ago, and I found an old Progressive Architecture magazine, which was like one of the premier design magazines at the time. And the cover story 30 years ago was, can this profession be saved? Luckily, I didn't read that article because I graduated and got a job, and 30 years later, I'm still here, right? And so I think the profession, as many professions are, is sort of always at a crossroads. And whether that's technology, so we saw this previously when it pivoted from hand drafting to using the computer. And that CAD was sort of a basic hand drafting in a computer. Now we've taken it to three-dimensional and Revit and BIM, and then we're to the next things. And now AI is the latest thing to be discussed. The reality at the end of the day is, like, we still need buildings, we still need spaces, we still need a roof over our heads, we still need the shelter. We need spaces to live, to work, to have meals, all those same things hasn't changed, right? So that fundamentals of the
fundamental things that we need as humans.
As humans, regardless of the technology, that's still there. So someone needs to still craft that and create that. Has it changed? Of course it has. Will it look different in 5 years? Absolutely, right? But the need will still exist, in my opinion.
Interesting. So what in the next few years, what do you anticipate that the architectural industry would look like in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, I know it's a buzzword, but AI is going to have an influence on every aspect of how we deliver work. And it will also have other impacts across all of our lives.
So speaking on the topic of AI then, AI in architecture, how do you think it's really going to affect or improve architecture, and how can school students, architectural school students and emerging architects prepare for that change that is to come?
Right. I think there's a few things. AI is one component. The fact that we all carry around effectively all the world's answers in a computer in our hands means that you actually don't, learning has changed. You don't have to know everything anymore. Because you can just find out the answer in your pocket.
Right.
But what you need to be, and I think with AI, what we still need to be is critical thinkers. That we can take the information, that we can distill it, decipher it, curate it, and present it back.
Right.
At the end of the day, architects are communicators. We communicate through drawings to our clients. Those drawings can be simple diagrams, they can be physical models, they can be, VR headsets, whatever it might be of a technology spectrum. That's still just communicating to them what a building is going to look like and feel like, what a space is going to be. We then use a lot of those same tools to communicate to craftspeople who build it, right? And whether they build parts in a factory or deliver it to a site and assemble it.
Right.
We don't actually draw the whole building, which is kind of strange.
Right.
We're sort of getting that way with this BIM modeling, where we are sort of modeling a lot of the things.
Yeah.
Where in the old days we would draw sort of typical details, now we're kind of drawing the whole building. So I think that immersion of design and construction is going to continue to evolve. But I think the technology is just a tool to communicate at the end of the day. Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to talk about the topic of pay,
Yes.
salary in architecture. I know it's a very touchy subject, right? To some.
Maybe.
So what can leadership do to help like the level of pay in architecture? Because I know a lot of firms operate very differently, right? Some will do, say, like per project. It depends on even what aspect of architecture that they're practicing, right? So,
Yes.
but can you shed a little bit of light
Sure.
into that?
First of all, I try to listen.
Okay.
So I listen to my colleagues if they have questions or concerns, and then I try to be very transparent about the process. The reality is, talk about value of architecture.
Yeah.
The world says that architects get 5% of construction cost. So they've already established how much money we're going to make.
Right.
Now it might be a little bit lower, might be a little bit higher, but it's around that.
Right.
So regardless of the firm. So effectively we're all getting the same amount of money.
Right.
What you do with that differs from every company. I've worked for places where sole owner took the biggest chunk of that money because they own the firm.
Right.
And their name was on the door, and that's okay because it was there, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that balancing of what that different companies will set up, so we're all starting with that 5%. How you sort of divvy that up amongst people.
Right.
I also explained to my team that, again, it's not necessarily about them, but how they're presented to the outside world. So clients will have in their mind the value of a project architect, for example, and they will know what a principal should be paid. Sort of no different than we would for any other service. If you go to a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, that you have an expectation of what their kind of hourly rate might be. So that sort of establishes a baseline of salaries. But again, I think different companies will set up their structure differently in terms of, are there bonuses? What happens to the profit? Does the profit go to the project, to the office, to the company, to the sector, whatever it might be?
Right.
I've worked at places where we were employee owned. Some of that profit would go to be reinvested, maybe to buy another firm or to invest in technology. In that case, sometimes the payout for you as an employee was to wait until the end of your career, and you're sort of invested in this company. And other companies I've worked for have been publicly traded, so a lot of the profit actually goes to the stockholders because they're the ones that are invested in the company. So I think it really depends on the company itself and how they're structured. But I think starts with three things: listening,
Yeah.
being transparent about it,
Yeah.
explaining how the individual fits into the structure of
Of the company.
the company financially,
Right.
how we present ourselves to our client, who again has an expectation, just like they say, like, well, I know you're only going to be 5%. They've already put us in that box. They've already said
Yeah,
how
like
much
they've
money they're going to.
predetermined,
They've already
yeah.
predetermined, and even within that, they have an assessment of, well, this is what I think an intern will get paid versus this is what I think a principal or a partner or a project manager.
Right.
They have preconceptions of that. I think for us as an industry, you haven't asked this, but is how do we elevate that? How do we elevate our value so instead of 5%, it's 6% or 5.5%?
Yeah.
Because we believe that we bring value to that team.
Right. Yeah. So I think that design in its very many forms, especially architecture, brings a lot of value. I was talking to a friend of mine. She actually does more on the people side, right? And so talking with people from an educational perspective or from an other, seeing how to better the education system. But we were talking about like architecture and design. She's like, yeah, it's true that really like architecture kind of shapes in the way like how we interact with our environment.
Yes.
And all of those things. So there's immense value.
Yes.
In architecture. So I think that there has to be some way to, as they say in the resume world, show don't tell, right?
Yes.
So how to show that value and for people to also appreciate that value that architecture brings. So I have a fun question for you.
Okay.
If you could have dinner with 3 architects, living or dead, to discuss the future of architecture, who would they be and why?
Okay, so I'm gonna go old this time.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll go all dead.
All dead?
All
Okay.
dead.
We're listening.
So I was born in the early 70s, and so again, I've been working for 30 years.
Okay.
When I grew up, the architects I was exposed to, and at my education in the 80s and 90s, we were still, this was the last century, right? Okay. The 3 biggest architects was Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Mies van der Rohe. Right now, I think probably if I were to go to school today, you'd have a different perspective on who those top architects would be.
Right.
But even though all 3 had died before I was born, their legacy was still very strong in the academic world and in the professional world. I grew up in Massachusetts. I fell in love with architecture in part, finding a book that was all about American architecture, and it included the Roby House by Frank Lloyd Wright and the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe, both here in Illinois. So for me, growing up in a New England setting, there were houses from the 1700s in my neighborhood, to see these modern masters in Chicago. And the fact that, the 3 biggest architects of the last century, 2 of them did significant work and practice here in Chicago. For me to come and, just be a kid from New England to come here and be able to do what I do here in Chicago, it's a dream come true, right? So the meal would probably be really awful with the 3 of them, but I think that would be interesting.
It would be, right.
I don't know.
Would you be at the same table? Would you have all of them together at once? Or?
Well, I don't think they would let me sit with them. That was probably
come on, no, Joe, they probably will. All right, so I guess a follow-up for that question. Imagine you were given unlimited resources to redesign a major city. Yes. Remember you told us when you were younger? So unlimited resources to redesign a major city. What will be the first change you will make?
Right. I'll connect that thread to me as a child was the thing that resonated with me about Disney and his future plans for what he envisioned Epcot to be was public transportation. That monorail idea of we shouldn't be using cars. To me, if we're going to talk about cities and city design, and we talk about what's an asset that our own city in Chicago has, it's that public transportation network. That could we actually do that today and invest that money to build the network?
Yeah.
I don't know that we could. I don't know that we have the vision to do that. But luckily our city leaders 100, 120 years ago knew enough to do that and invest in that.
Right.
So if we were to start from scratch, I think you have to start with the transportation.
Right. That's very interesting.
Because that's the thing that will then kind of unlock how the city grows and develops.
Right.
And you can create nodes around the stations. I mean, I think that's the right thing to do from a sustainability. I'm a huge public transportation advocate. Anywhere I travel in the world, we always try to take the train or the bus or, or just walk,
Right. And
rather
you
than
experience the city
in a different way. Yeah.
Yes. I actually, so I went to DePaul University.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, I would take the Blue Line, because I actually went to college downtown.
Right.
So I take the Blue Line. It was so peaceful, so beautiful. Just have to have the train stop, and then it was about maybe a 5-minute walk to my campus. So it was always nice, and
Yes.
I got to experience. Because I was not too far away from the Bean as well. So sometimes a friend of mine and I would walk to the Bean, enjoy the Bean, all of those different things. So I see why public transportation is such a huge thing. And it will save a lot of people on cost.
Yes.
In so many ways too. So it just allows you to experience the city, see more people in the city rather than hop in your car and then you drive to a spot. Good, interesting. So if leadership in architecture had a motto or rule book, what's one rule that will never or should never be broken?
Again, I think leadership starts with listening.
Okay.
It really does, to be empathetic to everyone on your team, to be empathetic to your clients. That's my rule, is just to listen.
To listen.
Take the time to listen.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. What do you think your generation, or how do you think your generation will change and impact the practice of architecture, either positively and whatnot? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I do think there are some things that are universal across all of us.
Right.
So I try not to get too structured in terms of generations.
Right.
Some of the questions that I get asked by the younger generations are the same ones that I was asking when I was their age. So it's not, again, I think there's universal things, whether it's opportunities, salary, promotions, those same things still exist. Which is why I try to be very transparent with them, because I would have appreciated that level of transparency when I was their age.
Right.
So I don't think there's, some things are fundamental. Having said that, I think the practice of architecture, and it includes the clients and the contractors, all of our consultants, we have definitely moved more into global, national and global companies. That's a trend that's been happening over the past 20, 30 years, in part because of the technology. I think being able to work remotely after COVID has accelerated that. We're much more adept at being able to communicate with other offices around the world. So if you were a young person, when I graduated 30 years ago, came to Chicago, I was only working for Chicago firms. They may have done projects kind of elsewhere, but they were really headquartered here. Now, if I'm a new grad coming to Chicago, chances are you're going to end up working for one of these national global practices that could help you work anywhere in the world, which is really amazing on the one hand. So I think we're going to continue to see this kind of large firm developments, while also seeing a lot of boutique, smaller practices still emerge. And so I think we're going to see both ends of that spectrum. And so if you're a person in Gen Z or Gen Alpha, I feel like they have perhaps less interest in firm ownership, in part because you're joining a big company that feels like, well, I'll never own it anyway. Or you may have an entrepreneurial spirit and start your own firm, because the way you can get a license now is earlier in your career. I think people are more able to have alternative income sources, whatever that might be, that's less structured around having a job with a company. So I think, again, both of those extremes, kind of the big global companies, which is one platform, and then really these kind of small, local boutique firms.
Cool. It's still in that range, right? But it's just sort of a question that popped into my head right now. What do you think is the importance of those boutique firms in today's architecture, for example?
Oh, I think they're essential. They're essential in our design community to have that balance, so that not every project has to be a mega project. Has to be, we can still do beautiful spaces,
Right.
and those may come from smaller boutique firms. At the end of the day, it's all about our relationships. We win work because of who we know and what we're able to do, and our capabilities, personal friendships that we've developed in working. So those apply whether it's a big firm or a small firm, right? I mean, you're still being hired because of who you are.
Right.
But I think those small firms are always going to have a special place in a particular community. Right?
Okay, interesting. What are some key skills and mindsets that young architects need to develop to become strong leaders?
Right. Good listeners.
Good listening.
Being consistent here. But again, as I talked about, like critical thinking.
Yeah.
Right. I think you have access to data and information in ways that we didn't in the past. So I don't have to memorize the code book. I can find that information at my fingertips. What you need to be able to do is critically think, so to analyze what it is that you're being informed about, whether that's from a client or a community or a code book or a consultant, whatever it might be, and to distill that information down into a meaningful solution. I think throughout all of history, we're still communicators. Whether you're drawing with a pencil or you're drawing with a computer, VR headset, physical model, we're communicators. So what do we look for in a young person is, are they critical thinkers? And can they communicate their ideas? You do those two things, you can be an effective designer, leader, and grow.
Well, that's very interesting. I think that one of the things that you mentioned, even like with regards to being able to pop up like your phone, bring out your phone and then find information without having to memorize certain things that would have otherwise been memorized, right? So I think that's an advantage. But I think that even from maybe a photography or filmmaking perspective, a lot of times, even with some of the artwork that I do, I stick to the basic. I do not complicate the process.
Right.
That's one of the things I believe that helps me in how I tell stories and all those things. Just make it as simple as possible. I think a lot of times people try to complicate processes when literally sticking to the basics can take you much further. So thank you for that. So one of the other questions I had for you is, how can architectural firms cultivate a leadership culture rather than a design-focused one? Or should they even have that in the first place?
And I would say I think you can do both.
Okay.
And I think most firms in the world need a collaborative spirit to execute their designs. Nobody is working by themselves from ideation all the way through construction.
Right.
It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
So as soon as two people are engaged in a process, then it's about design and collaboration and how we communicate with each other and how we're going to convey that.
Right.
So I think it isn't about just leadership or just design. I think you can do both. And again, creating that environment that allows for true collaboration, true listening to everyone's ideas, taking that as an assembly, cultivating it, curating it, distilling it down to those basic ideas, right?
Right. Okay, that's very interesting. And what is one piece of advice that you would give to an architect struggling to step into a leadership role? So they have
Right.
the battle. I have a cousin that he's a software developer, he's a senior software developer, and he's always like, I don't want anything to do with leadership. I just want to be, so maybe there might be an architect that is out there that also has that struggle. It's like, I don't want to have
Right.
anything to do with leadership. I want to just focus on, either the design side of things. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I think, first of all, nobody has all the answers,
Right.
and we're all continuing to learn. That's what's fascinating about meeting like a young architect, is they feel like, I have to learn so much, and I say, no, we're all still learning. And the longer I go, the more I'm actually like, oh yeah, now I'm learning more. So I think from a new leader perspective, you're gonna fail. You're gonna have to test things out. It has to be authentic to the individual. Again, I think it's important to lead with listening first, trying to meet people where they are, understand, be empathetic, their perspective. We're all trying to do the right thing, so you may be approaching somebody thinking that they're not doing it the way you'd want them to do it, but they're doing it the way they think should be done, right? So I think leading with, good examples, lead by example, set clear expectations, don't get frustrated, smile, right? Be positive, because actually I think that's one of the important things about a leadership is how you present yourself is how it gets received.
Right.
So if you come in a very angry or emotional state, people will react to it. I try to come into it super positive, and it's received that way. And so even if that person on the other side that I'm trying to lead is in a difficult spot themselves, they feel better because I'm positive about it. Right. And I say, we're going to solve this together, right? And it's like, okay, good.
I think it's very interesting what you mentioned, even just smiling alone. Because it really changes.
It totally changes how how it's received.
Because I remember there was an instance like with the studio. I know some of the folks brought you up. So the day I was to move, apparently the elevator was down.
Okay.
And I'm like, great, but I need to move. And so I'm like, I'm on the 3rd floor. Like I could have been on the 8th floor. I'm not. So I'm on the 3rd floor. I was like, I'm just gonna pick these things up. They're not like massively heavy. It was my workout for the day. Yes. It took me about 3 hours, but I was like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm gonna bring these things up and move them because I needed to move. I was tired of working from home. I know the people that enjoy it. I just needed to separate that, and so I was like, this has to
it has to happen.
Yeah. Right. And so I took more of a positive approach. And I remember they had sent me an email. They're like, oh, everyone at the front was so sad that they were not able to help you. Blah blah blah. They said you were so nice. So those kind of things like changing a negative situation into a positive thing can really change. Can change.
I mean, that's a great example because it didn't change the fact that you still had to move your stuff from the ground floor to the 3rd floor.
Right.
You could either be positive and just like, okay, I'm going to deal with this, or be angry. Either way, you still have to carry the thing. So it's sort of how you react to it. Right. So again, I think as a leader, come in with calmness, smiling. We're gonna solve this issue, whatever it might be.
Right. I think that's wonderful. So I want us to look ahead, in terms of architecture. What is one trend or innovation in architecture that excites you the most?
Well, I thought we were going to do the one that I dislike the most. I was going to do farmhouse architecture in the city, which I don't understand why somebody wants to live in a farmhouse in the city. Okay, so that's my negative. I think as positive, I love projects this mixed use projects, highly sustainable projects. I think adaptability, the fact that I think there's a blurriness between in the past it was like, this is where I lived, this is where I worked, this is where I played. There's a lot more of projects that we're finding where those three things blur together. and then create future opportunities for a community to interact around that.
Right.
Those things excite me a lot.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I remember there was a time I was apartment hunting, and I went into this place, and they had like sort of a co-working space
Right.
in the like apartment lobby area, but then it also had the gym as a part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was quite interesting to see those things into play. So in that light of even looking ahead of things that excite us, what if you could change one thing about how architecture is thought or practiced, what would it be?
Well, I think it's again, architecture is the most public of art, and I think we don't allow that to be celebrated quite as much as it should be. I think we see it in our city every day. Maybe the buildings aren't preserved the way they could be, reused the way they could be, that it's sometimes our systems encourage demolition because it's cheaper and more affordable to start over, rather than there's not enough incentive to retain and reuse and repurpose buildings. So that kind of the true value of buildings in our community, I would love to see that elevated, and then that would sort of elevate the value of what architects do.
Right, yeah. I've always had this question of even the balance between old architecture and sort of allowing like new architecture and new emerging architects to also, not for want of word, not really establish their name, but to also have flexibility.
Yes.
So how do you think those two can interplay even while preserving buildings?
I think the city should be a living piece, right? It's a living thing.
Yeah.
And I think here in our own city of Chicago, there is plenty of space, there's plenty of land, there's plenty of vacant land to be developed.
Right.
And so I don't think it's an either or thing, I think it can be both.
It could be both, okay.
And what I don't want to see our city become is like Venice, where it just becomes a museum of architecture, and the buildings are just a shell, and nobody actually inhabits the spaces inside. So I don't want it to just be, for tourist buses to drive around and see the buildings from the outside.
Right.
The buildings are really intended to be occupied inside. Now, can they adapt and be repurposed and changed over time? Absolutely, and they should be. So whether it's converting these old office buildings into residential or hotels or mixed use, that I love. I'd love to encourage that. While also then, if there's an empty lot, let's do a new building that's reflective of our current times, right? And I think you can have both, and I think you should.
Yeah, I find it very interesting also some of the things that are going on in the city with, say, during COVID, a lot of like office spaces had to like pretty much close down, or most people moved out and whatnot, and some of those, like especially on LaSalle Street, are being repurposed into more more living spaces than office spaces. I was reading an article, and I can't well, but it was talking about even how the plumbing in office spaces are thought differently than in housing. So those are some challenges that in the design phase that have to be have to be thought about.
Yes.
But yeah, so what's your vision for the future of architecture in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I think we're going to see more of that repurposing of old buildings, in part because I think there's going to be an even further push about sustainability. And I think we're going to, this continued trend about capturing and looking at data is going to inform decisions made around developments. So really understanding how much energy a building uses, right? It's no different than you go to buy a car, you know how much the mileage is.
Right.
Why don't we have that for all of our buildings? I think we will get there because we can monitor it, we can get the data, we can look at an analysis of the cost. That will help to inform our opportunities to repurpose buildings, and it will help to make the new buildings that we do create be at the highest level of performance. We're looking at specifically less around the word sustainability, which sustain just by itself means we want to keep sort of the status quo. We're looking at regenerative design, so it's actually giving back. So can a building actually harvest and collect, whether it's energy or wind or water, and give something back to the community? That really feels to me as like awesome, inspirational, and that goes back to like something that Disney would have thought about doing, right? So like, can a building actually, instead of taking and using, can it give back? So I think that's where the future is going to lie.
I love how, because I have more of a technology, or I had more of a technology background, and so I love how data works and how we're able to use data to sort of make decisions that will better our communities, be it through architecture and whatnot. And we're talking about some net zero buildings. It's such a beautiful concept, and a lot of firms are implementing it quite well. In today's society. So it's really great to see. We're going to play a fun game, right?
Okay.
And it's going to be 10 questions, quick answers.
Okay.
Favorite restaurant in Chicago?
Avec.
Okay. If you weren't an architect, what do you think you'd be doing?
Photography.
Okay. That's my job. If you could teleport to any city in the world right now just to explore its architecture, where would you go?
Tokyo.
Tadao.
Never been.
Never
been. So it's.
Okay, that's it. What's one architectural trend or buzzword you secretly love or hate?
I'll go with the hate. The farmhouse. Living in a farmhouse in the city.
It's like I hate that. If you could live in any building in the world, past or present, which would it be and why?
I'll spend the night at the Farnsworth House. I think that would be cool to wake up in nature.
Very good choice.
Yeah.
I really like that choice. All right, cool. Would you rather design a futuristic skyscraper or restore a century-old landmark?
Skyscraper.
Oh, good. Brutalism, love or hate?
When it's good, it's really good. When it's bad, it's really bad.
All right. What's one architectural cliche or trend you secretly wish would disappear?
I think talking about AI.
That's it.
Yeah.
We wake up tomorrow and it's like, no. What's AI?
Let's just get back to work.
Describe your dream project in 3 words.
My own home. Working on that right now.
Oh, that's amazing. I would love to see the design. All right, so thank you, Joe. It's such a pleasure to have you. So we're going to have some closing remarks right now. So where can your audience find you and be able to connect with you?
I'm here in Chicago every day, probably at a coffee shop, probably in the studio, trying to do great work for our city.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. And what's one question you'd like to ask our audience to think about regarding leadership in architecture or regarding architecture?
I think the audience should understand the value of architecture and that they have a voice in it too. So holding our architects accountable, our clients accountable. So the general public should really be pushing all their people and the mayor to demand a high standard of design for their communities.
Wonderful. I think maybe I'll be going to City Hall meetings now. No! No, okay, that's wonderful. Oh, it's a pleasure to have you, Joe.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to be a part of this series, please feel free to shoot me an email, or if you believe that there's someone that will be a great addition to this interview series, please put in their information or send me an email with their information so that I can reach out to them. See you in the next one. All right. Thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and especially subscribe so that the right people can see our content and be able to be engaged with the content and be impacted by this content. Thank you again for watching. See you on the next one. Bye.